In a distant galaxy, far away from the bustling cities of Earth, there once existed a grand and powerful kingdom. It was a place of beauty and prosperity, ruled by a wise and beloved queen. However, the kingdom's fate would take a tragic turn when a mysterious plague struck its royal family. It spread quickly and silently, leaving no one untouched. The princess, Alira, was the last to fall victim to the deadly disease. The disease was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It made her skin appear to rot and decay, giving her the appearance of a leper. The once beautiful princess, known for her grace and elegance, now looked like a shadow of her former self. Her body withered, her face became unrecognizable, and she was no longer the symbol of hope for her people. Her people, afraid of the disease, turned against her. They believed her touch was cursed, that she would spread the plague to anyone who came near. In their fear, they abandoned her. The palace, once filled with laughter and light, became a cold and empty place. Alira was cast out into the wilderness, left to die alone. No one came to her aid, not even her closest allies. They all feared the disease that ravaged her body. With no one left to turn to, Alira wandered through the dark, desolate forest. Her body was weak and her heart heavy. She was a princess no more, only a broken woman, wandering without purpose. As Alira walked deeper into the wilderness, she came to understand that her life no longer mattered to anyone. The kingdom she had once loved was gone, and she was left behind like a forgotten relic. Her beauty had been taken from her, and with it, the love and respect of her people. She couldn't help but wonder if she was truly cursed, or if her people had simply abandoned her when they no longer saw her as useful. Despite her pain, Alira did not give up. Her spirit, though scared, remained strong. She knew that she couldn't give in to despair. The princess may have been lost, but she was not yet ready to die. She found a small cave to rest in, gathering what little strength she had left. Her mind wandered to the time when she was happy, before the disease had come. Her memories of the royal palace, the gardens full of flowers, and the laughter of children seemed like another life. She held on to those memories as a way to remind herself that she had once been someone important. But as the days passed, Alira realized that the plague had not only taken her beauty, but it had also taken her sense of hope. She had no future, no kingdom to return to. The world had forgotten her, or so she thought. In the depths of her despair, something unexpected happened. Far from her kingdom, a human explorer named Kel was on a mission of his own. His ship had crash-landed on the same planet where Alira had been abandoned. And little did she know, this human would change the course of her life forever. Kel was a human from Earth, a skilled explorer sent on a mission to map the distant and uncharted worlds beyond the reaches of known space. His ship, a small but powerful vessel, had been built to withstand the dangers of unknown planets. However, a powerful storm in the atmosphere had thrown his ship off course, and before he knew it, he was plummeting toward an unknown planet. With a crash that shook the ground, the ship's engines failed, and the ship slammed into the rocky surface of the planet. For hours, Kel struggled to regain control, his hands working quickly to assess the damage. The ship was heavily damaged, but it was still functional enough for him to make his way to the surface. When he finally emerged from the wreckage, he realized he was far from the main trade routes and had no way to contact anyone. His best option was to find shelter and wait for a rescue or fix his ship. But something caught his attention that kept him from focusing on his own survival: the eerie silence of the land around him. The planet was beautiful in a strange way, but its beauty was tinged with a sense of sadness, as though something was terribly wrong. He noticed ruins in the distance, old, crumbled buildings that once must have been part of a grand city. The wind howled softly through the broken structures, and Kel felt an odd chill run down his spine. Yet he knew he couldn't stay there forever. He had to find food and water if he was going to survive. As he ventured deeper into the land, Kel came across something unexpected: a girl. Or at least, he thought she was a girl at first. She was sitting by the entrance of a small cave, her head bowed, her body thin and frail. She looked as if she had been abandoned, lost, and left to die. Her skin was pale and blotched with strange marks, the color of her flesh uneven and sickly. She had an air of sadness about her that pulled at Cal's heart. At first, he hesitated. Her appearance was unsettling. Her skin appeared to be rotting, and there was a strange aura of danger about her. The locals on the planet had warned him about the Leper Princess, a mysterious figure who was said to bring misfortune to anyone who came near her. But Cal's instincts told him that this was no ordinary person. Despite the fear that gripped him, he approached slowly, speaking in a calm voice, trying to reassure her. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. The girl raised her head slightly, and Cal saw the depth of pain and hopelessness in her eyes. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Her face was twisted and disfigured, but there was something about her gaze that made Cal feel a connection, something that told him she wasn't just some cursed being. She barely whispered, "Please, leave me. I have nothing left." Her voice was soft, but full of sorrow. Cal could feel the weight of her words, and without thinking, he knelt down beside her. "You're not alone," Cal said, his voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere. Let me help you." The girl didn't respond, but she didn't push him away either. Cal's heart broke for her. He knew he could help somehow. He was a trained survivalist, and he had advanced medical equipment aboard his ship. He couldn't just leave her here to die. Cal gently lifted her into his arms and carried her back to the wreckage of his ship. He would tend to her wounds, help her recover. It was clear she needed care, and despite her appearance, Cal knew there was more to her than the curse that surrounded her. This was a woman with a story, and Cal intended to uncover it. Little did he know, saving her would change everything: his mission, his life, and the future of a kingdom he had never known existed. Cal moved quickly, carefully cradling Alira in his arms as he made his way back to the wrecked remains of his ship. The sharp wind cut through the air, but Cal barely noticed it. His focus was solely on the girl in his arms. He had to get her to safety, away from the cold, the wilderness, and the loneliness of the planet. As he entered the small, damaged ship, the interior felt much warmer, a welcome contrast to the harsh outside world. Cal laid Alira gently on the small bed in the back of the ship, which was originally meant for long rest periods during space travel. He quickly got to work, assessing her condition. Her body was weak, her skin unnaturally cold to the touch, and there was a faint, sickly smell about her. But Cal wasn't scared. He had seen all sorts of things in his travels, some strange, some dangerous, but nothing had ever made him feel the way he did now. This was a life he could save. From the small medical kit he kept on board for emergencies, Cal pulled out a few basic tools. He was trained in first aid and had advanced technology at his disposal, but nothing in his training had prepared him for a disease like this. The patches on her skin looked like they were festering, as if the very cells in her body were slowly breaking down. The only thing he knew for sure was that he couldn't leave her to suffer any longer. He set to work cleaning her wounds and applying a healing gel that was designed to treat burns, cuts, and other skin issues. He'd never seen anything like the strange marks on her body, but he hoped the gel might help soothe the irritation. As he worked, he softly spoke to her, even though he didn't know if she could hear him. "I'm going to help you, Alira. Just hang on." She didn't respond at first, but Cal kept going. He knew that if he could get her to drink some water and take a few basic nutrients, she might regain some strength. Slowly, Alira's breathing seemed to steady, and her eyelids fluttered. She wasn't entirely unconscious, but she was too weak to speak. Cal couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for her. This princess, this so-called Leper Princess, was more than just a sick girl abandoned by her people. Hours passed, and Cal didn't leave her side. He monitored her closely, checking for any signs of improvement or decline. Slowly, he began to notice small changes. The sickness that had marred her skin started to look less severe, as though the healing gel had started to work. Her pulse steadied, and the deep, exhausted breaths she took seemed less strained. Alira's eyes finally opened fully, and for the first time, she met Cal's gaze. There was a mix of confusion, fear, and gratitude in her eyes. Cal smiled gently, trying to reassure her. "You're safe now. I won't leave you alone," he said, his voice calm and steady. For a long moment, Alira just looked at him, as though unsure whether to trust him. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Cal could see the pain in her eyes, the pain of someone who had been abandoned, forgotten, and left to die. "I'm not like them," Cal added softly. "I'm not going to leave you." It was then that Alira's voice, barely above a whisper, broke through the silence. "Why? Why are you helping me? I'm cursed. I'm a monster." Her voice cracked with the weight of her words, the pain of her own self-hatred clear in her tone. Cal shook his head. "You're not a monster. You're just someone who's been through a lot. And I'm going to help you, Alira. You don't have to be alone anymore." Alira stared at him for a long time, her gaze searching for any hint of dishonesty. When she found none, she closed her eyes, a tear slipping from the corner of her eye. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." It was a small, fragile moment, but it was enough. Cal knew that helping her wasn't just about healing her body. It was about showing her that she was still worthy of kindness, of care, and that, in itself, was worth more than any mission he had ever been on. The days after Alira's first recovery were a quiet, difficult time. The planet, though beautiful, was a harsh and unforgiving place. Cal had no idea how long it would take for him to repair his ship, or if he would even be able to get off the planet. But for now, his focus was solely on Alira. She was weak, and though her condition had improved, the journey ahead would not be easy. Cal knew that surviving on this planet wasn't just about food and water. The wilderness here was filled with dangers that even his training couldn't always prepare him for. The planet's strange wildlife was unpredictable, and the environment itself was far from forgiving. But as difficult as things were, Cal was determined to keep Alira safe. Each day, he ventured out into the wilderness, hunting for food and gathering supplies. The environment was barren in some places, with only hardy plants and strange, wild animals to provide any sort of nourishment. The air was thin and dry, and the land stretched out in every direction, as far as the eye could see, desolate and untouched by civilization. Alira, although still fragile, began to take small steps toward regaining her strength. She would sit up in the small shelter Cal had built, watching as he worked. Her skin, though still scared, was no longer deteriorating as it once had. The strange, painful marks were starting to fade, and Cal could see the spark of life returning to her eyes. But she still struggled. The weight of her past haunted her, and though she could now sit up and talk, it was clear that the emotional wounds were deeper than the physical ones. Cal often found her staring into the distance, lost in thought, as if trying to make sense of the world that had abandoned her. He understood. She had been a princess, a symbol of power and grace, until she had been cast aside, left to die alone in the wilderness. No matter how much he helped her physically, Cal knew that her mind would take much longer to heal. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in fiery orange and red, Cal returned to the shelter after a long day of searching for food. He found Alira sitting by the entrance of the cave, her gaze fixed on the horizon. It was clear that she had been thinking deeply, but when she saw Cal, her expression softened. "I never thought I would be here," Alira said quietly, her voice still weak but filled with emotion. "I was supposed to be a ruler. I was supposed to save my people." Cal set down the small pile of food he had gathered and sat beside her. "You still can," he said gently. "You don't have to be alone. I know you've been through a lot, but you're not the same person you were before." Alira looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as though looking for something. "I'm not sure I can do it. I'm a burden. I've been cursed." Cal shook his head firmly. "You're not a burden, Alira. You're a survivor, and you're stronger than you think." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of her past hanging in the air between them. But Cale didn't press her for more answers. He knew that healing would take time. What mattered now was that she was alive, and that together they could face whatever came next. As the days turned into weeks, Cale and Alira formed a small routine. He taught her how to use the tools on his ship, and in turn, she began to help him. Slowly, she regained some of her confidence, though the shadows of her past still loomed over her. She still feared that her people would never accept her again, that she was nothing more than a broken princess. But Cale never let her believe that. He reminded her every day that she was not the same person who had been abandoned. The planet may have been harsh, but together, they were surviving. The wilderness was tough, but so were they. And for the first time since the plague had taken her kingdom, Alira began to feel a spark of hope flicker inside her heart. Maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild what had been lost. As the weeks passed, Alira's physical health continued to improve, though her mind still wrestled with doubts. Cale remained by her side, offering her not only care but unwavering encouragement. Slowly, she began to believe in the possibility of a future. But the mysterious nature of her condition, the disease that had turned her into a leper princess, continued to haunt her thoughts. She had no answers, only the painful memories of how she had been abandoned by her people. One quiet evening, as they sat by a fire outside the cave, Cale noticed how restless Alira had become. She had been staring into the fire for some time, as if seeking answers in its flickering flames. "Alira," Cale said gently, breaking the silence, "I know you're troubled. You've been through a lot, but there's more to your story. More than just a disease. I can see it in your eyes. You're holding something back." Alira looked at him, her expression a mix of fear and uncertainty. She had grown to trust Cale, but revealing the truth of her past felt like another burden she didn't know if she could carry. "I don't know if I can tell you," she whispered, her voice heavy with regret. "The truth of what happened to me, to my kingdom." Cale leaned forward, his eyes soft and understanding. "You don't have to say everything all at once. But if we're going to move forward, if we're going to make things right, you need to face the past. We can figure this out together." Alira hesitated. She had spent so many years hiding the truth, convincing herself that she was a broken princess with no future. But now, with Cale beside her, she felt a small flicker of courage. She sighed deeply before beginning to speak. "My kingdom," she started, her voice trembling. "It was once a place of great power, ruled by my family. But there were enemies, ancient enemies who wanted to destroy us. They cursed me and my bloodline. This disease, this plague, it wasn't just bad luck. It was a weapon, a curse meant to make sure no one would rise from my family again." Cale listened carefully, his expression filled with concern, but also empathy. "A curse?" he asked, his mind racing with questions. "But why you? Why your family?" Alira looked away, her eyes distant as she recalled the past. "It was a rival kingdom, a group that felt threatened by my father's rule. They sought out an ancient dark magic, one that could destroy anyone it touched. My family was poisoned by this magic, but it was I who bore the worst of it. The disease began spreading within me, ruining everything I once was." "Is that why they abandoned you?" Cale asked, his voice soft. "Because they believed you were cursed." Alira nodded slowly, her face filled with sorrow. "Yes, when the plague spread, my people turned their backs on me. They feared the curse would spread to them too. They cast me out, left me to die, and told themselves that it was for the good of the kingdom. But in doing so, they killed me, just not physically." She paused, feeling the weight of her words settle over them both. She felt exposed, as though a wall she had spent years building was now crumbling. But despite the vulnerability, there was something freeing about speaking the truth, even to a stranger. Cale took a moment before speaking, processing what Alira had just shared. That's a terrible burden to carry. But what if this curse, this disease, isn't what you think it is? What if it's not the end, but the beginning of something new? Elira looked at him, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. What do you mean? I've been studying your condition, Cale explained, and I found something. There are old texts I've come across in my travels, ancient writings about magical curses, about curses that could be broken by something called a union of pure blood and unbroken spirit. It sounds like it could be the key to breaking your curse. Elira's heart skipped a beat. A union, she whispered, her mind racing. But what does that mean? How could that work? Cale smiled gently, his voice filled with quiet determination. I don't have all the answers yet, but I'm willing to help you find them. You don't have to carry this burden alone, Elira. Together, we'll uncover the truth, and I'll do whatever it takes to help you. For the first time in a long time, Elira felt a sense of purpose. The curse that had haunted her for so long now seemed like something she could finally fight against. Maybe there was hope after all. Maybe Cale wasn't just the man who had saved her, but the one who would help her rebuild everything she had lost. The next morning, Cale woke to the sound of distant wind howling through the barren landscape. Elira was already awake, sitting by the fire, her face thoughtful but calmer than it had been in weeks. There was something different about her now, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. Cale could see it in her eyes, a spark of hope beginning to take root. I've been thinking, Elira said, her voice steady but still soft. If we're going to find answers about this curse, we need to start somewhere. My father once spoke of an ancient temple, hidden deep within the mountains of this planet. He said it was a place of knowledge, a place where secrets were guarded. Maybe there's something there that can help us. Cale listened carefully, his mind already working on a plan. A temple? He asked, intrigued. Do you know where it is? Elira shook her head. Not exactly. But I remember him saying it was built by the Ancient Ones, the same people who cursed my family. If it still exists, it might hold the answers we need. Cale stood and began packing their supplies. He knew the journey would be dangerous, but it was a risk worth taking. Elira's description of the temple sparked something in him, a sense of adventure, of purpose. Then we'll find it, he said confidently. We've come this far. We're not stopping now. The two set off later that morning, leaving behind the safety of their makeshift shelter. The mountains Elira spoke of were far to the east, their jagged peaks visible even from the distance. The journey would take several days, but Cale was prepared. He had gathered enough food and water to sustain them, and his ship's navigation tools would help guide their way. The first day passed quietly, with Elira and Cale walking side by side through the barren terrain. Elira moved slowly, still regaining her strength, but she refused to let herself fall behind. Cale admired her resilience. This woman, who had once been abandoned and left to die, was now pushing forward with a determination that inspired him. As the sun began to set, they made camp near a cluster of strange, glowing plants that provided a soft light in the growing darkness. Elira sat close to the fire, her hands stretched toward the warmth. It feels strange, she said after a long silence. To hope again. For so long, I thought my story was over. Cale looked at her, his expression kind. Your story isn't over, Elira. It's just beginning. And whatever happens, you won't face it alone. That night, as they rested under the stars, Elira couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was fighting for something. And Cale's presence gave her a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The next day brought new challenges. The terrain grew rougher as they approached the mountains, and the air became colder. Elira's steps faltered at times, but Cale was always there to steady her. We're getting closer, he said, pointing to a narrow path winding up the side of the mountain. That must lead to the temple. By the time they reached the base of the mountain, the sun was beginning to set again, casting long shadows across the land. As they climbed the rocky path, the air grew heavy and a strange energy seemed to hum around them. Alira paused, her hand resting against the cool stone wall of the mountain. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cale nodded, his senses on high alert. "It's like the air is alive," he said. "We must be close." They continued upward, the path growing narrower and more treacherous with each step. At last, they rounded a bend and saw it, a massive stone doorway carved into the side of the mountain. Symbols and markings covered the surface, glowing faintly in the dim light. The temple was ancient, its grandeur untouched by time. "This is it," Alira said, her voice filled with awe and fear. "The temple of the ancient ones." Cale placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then let's find the answers we came for," he said. Together, they stepped toward the door, ready to face whatever secrets the temple held. The stone doorway loomed before them, its surface covered in strange, glowing symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Alira stepped forward, her breath shallow as she studied the markings. "These symbols," she murmured. "I've seen them before. My father used to talk about them." Cale stood beside her, his eyes scanning the doorway. "Then you recognize them?" Alira nodded slowly. "Yes, but they were always a mystery to me." He never explained much about them, only that they held the key to understanding the curse. Cale placed a hand on the door, testing it. To his surprise, the stone felt warm under his fingers, almost as if it was responding to his touch. Slowly, the massive door began to creak open, revealing a dark hallway beyond. With a glance at Alira, Cale stepped forward. "Stay close. We don't know what's inside." Together, they moved into the temple, the air heavy with the scent of ancient dust and forgotten knowledge. The walls of the hallway were lined with more carvings, some depicting strange creatures and others showing images of powerful beings, figures that seemed both human and divine. Alira reached out, brushing her fingers against one of the carvings. "These are the ancient ones," she whispered, her voice full of reverence. "They were the ones who created the curse, the ones who brought this magic into the world." Cale could feel the weight of history pressing down on them as they moved deeper into the temple. It looks like they were not just powerful. They were also wise. These carvings tell a story, a history we can barely understand. As they continued down the corridor, they arrived at a large chamber. The room was dimly lit by faintly glowing crystals embedded in the walls. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, atop which rested an ancient book. Its pages looked fragile, and its cover was embossed with more of the glowing symbols they had seen outside. Alira's eyes widened as she approached the pedestal. "This book, it's the one my father spoke of. The Book of the Ancients." Cale watched her closely. "Do you think it holds the answers we need?" Alira hesitated before carefully reaching out to touch the book. "I don't know, but if there's a chance it can help me, help us understand what happened to me, then it's worth a try." With a deep breath, she opened the book. The pages rustled, revealing ancient writings that seemed to shimmer as she read them. Her fingers traced the words, and her voice, though soft, was filled with awe. "It says, the curse was never meant to destroy. It was meant to test. A test of strength and spirit. Those who were cursed were chosen to break the cycle, to prove they could rise above their fate." Cale stepped closer, studying the words over her shoulder. "It sounds like the curse wasn't a punishment. It was a challenge." Alira's heart raced as she read further. "It says here, the curse can be broken by a union of two souls, bound together by pure intent, not by blood." The curse wasn't about bloodlines at all. It was about finding someone who would stand by me, someone who would help me become what I was meant to be. Cale felt a strange sense of clarity wash over him. So the curse wasn't a death sentence. It was a path to something greater. Alira looked up at him, her eyes filled with wonder and uncertainty. "But what does that mean for me? Can I really break free from this? Can I return to the kingdom I was supposed to rule?" Cale took a step forward, his voice steady and sincere. "You don't need to go back to be who you were, Elira. The past is behind you now. You have the power to create your future, and you don't have to do it alone." Elira looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a broken princess. She felt like someone who could change her destiny. The room seemed to hum with energy, as though the very walls of the temple were alive with the power of the ancient knowledge they had uncovered. The book lay open before them, its secrets revealed, but Elira knew the real journey was just beginning. "Let's find out what we're meant to do next," she said softly, closing the book with newfound resolve. Hale smiled at her. Together. And with that, they turned to leave the chamber, the path ahead uncertain but full of possibility. With the book of the ancients securely in her hands, Elira felt a strange combination of relief and uncertainty. She had spent so many years believing the curse was her end, that the world had abandoned her. But now, standing in the heart of the ancient temple, the weight of that belief seemed to begin to lift. There was hope. There was a chance for a future she never imagined. Cale stood beside her, watching her carefully as they made their way back through the darkened corridors of the temple. He could see the change in her, how her posture had straightened, how her steps were more confident. Elira had discovered something that no one could have predicted, that the curse wasn't the end, but a test, a path to a new beginning. "So, what do we do now?" Cale asked, his voice gentle but curious. They had learned so much, but there was still a long road ahead. The temple had offered only part of the answer. Elira closed the book, feeling its weight in her hands. "We need to find out more about this test." The book mentioned a union of pure intent, but what does that mean? How do we prove that we can rise above the curse? And most importantly, how do we break the cycle? Cale thought for a moment. "I don't know yet, but we've learned something important. The curse isn't something that can just be removed. It's about strength, about choosing to rise above it. And from everything I've seen in you, Elira, I believe you already have that strength." She looked at him, her eyes softening. "I don't feel strong, Cale. I feel like I've lost everything. My kingdom, my family, my people." "But you haven't lost yourself," he interrupted. "You're still here. You're still fighting. That's what matters." Elira took a deep breath, feeling his words settle within her. He was right. She wasn't the same person she had been when she was cast aside. She had been through so much, yet she was still standing. And now she had the opportunity to take control of her own fate. "We need to leave the temple and find more answers," Cale said, glancing at the entrance. "There has to be more information out there. This book isn't the end of the journey. It's just the beginning." Elira nodded, her resolve hardening. "You're right. We can't stop now." The two made their way out of the temple, the heavy door closing behind them with a deep, echoing thud. The air outside was colder, and the mountains loomed high above them. Their journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. They set off across the rough terrain, the wind biting at their faces. Elira's mind raced with questions, but she pushed them aside. They had answers now. They had a direction, and that was enough for the moment. As they traveled, they passed through dense forests and rocky hills, their surroundings growing more treacherous with every step. The planet was harsh, and the dangers of the wilderness were never far away. But Cale remained close, guiding her through the obstacles that came their way. He was her strength when she faltered, and though she hadn't asked for it, she had come to rely on his presence. On the fourth day of their journey, they arrived at a small, isolated village at the edge of a forest. The people there were wary, their faces hardened by the harshness of life on this planet. But there was something different about this village, an old, weathered building that stood at its center. It was unlike anything Elira had seen before, with strange carvings on its walls that seemed to mirror those of the temple. "This place," Elira whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's like it's connected to the ancient ones." Cale nodded. "Maybe this is what we've been looking for. We need to talk to the people here, see if they know anything about the curse or the test. They approached the building, and as they drew closer, a figure stepped out from the shadows. An old man, bent with age, but sharp in his gaze, watched them with a knowing look. His eyes seemed to recognize something in Alira, as though he had seen her before. "You've come," the old man said, his voice raspy but calm. "I knew you would. The time has come to finish what was started long ago." Alira stepped forward, her heart pounding. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The old man smiled, a mysterious glint in his eyes. "I am one of the last keepers of the ancient knowledge, and I have waited for you. It's time to learn the final truth of the curse and how it can be broken." Kale exchanged a glance with Alira, then stepped back slightly to give her space. This was her moment. The answers they had been seeking were within reach. "We're ready," Alira said, her voice steady. The old man nodded slowly. "Then come inside. The journey you've been on is about to reveal its final piece." And with that, Alira and Kale stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever truth awaited them. The old man led Alira and Kale into the weathered building, his steps slow but purposeful. The air inside was thick with the smell of ancient incense, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with dusty books and scrolls. The flickering light of a single candle cast long shadows across the room, making everything seem mysterious and alive. Alira felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if this place, despite its age and wear, was somehow connected to her. The carvings on the walls, similar to those in the temple, seemed to pulse with a quiet energy. This was a place of great knowledge, and perhaps the answers she had been searching for were finally within reach. The old man motioned for them to sit at a large, circular table in the center of the room. He moved with surprising agility for his age, his eyes sharp as he examined them both. "You've come seeking answers," the old man said, his voice soft yet full of authority. "But the truth is not easy to bear. The curse that was placed on you, Princess Alira, is not what you think. It is not a punishment, it is a trial meant to test your very soul." Alira's heart raced. "A trial," she repeated, barely able to process his words. "But why? Why me? Why my family?" The old man sighed, sitting down across from them. "The curse was not meant to destroy your kingdom. It was meant to find the one who could unite the broken pieces of your bloodline and restore balance to your people. Your family, Alira, was never truly lost. It was always waiting for you to awaken, to rise above the tragedy that had befallen you." Kale leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in thought. "But how could a curse like this help anyone? How can something so painful be a test?" The old man smiled faintly. "Pain is part of the trial. It forces growth, understanding, and strength. The ancient ones, the ones who placed the curse on your family, knew that only through hardship could the true ruler of your kingdom emerge. Only someone who could face the darkness within themselves could lead others to the light." Alira swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling on her like a heavy cloak. She had spent so long thinking she was cursed, that she had been abandoned by her people. But now she was beginning to understand. Her family hadn't abandoned her. They had given her a chance to prove herself. "You said I have to rise above it," Alira said, her voice quiet but determined. "But how? How do I break the cycle? How do I return to my people when I have nothing left?" The old man's gaze softened. "The cycle can only be broken when you embrace your true self, Alira. When you accept the pain, the loss, and the fear, and then let go of it. The curse has never been about your bloodline, your kingdom, or even the disease you suffered from. It has always been about you and the power you have within. The strength to rise from the ashes, to heal, and to lead." Alira's mind raced as she absorbed the old man's words. It wasn't just about breaking the curse. It was about discovering who she truly was, what she was truly capable of. The past had shaped her, yes, but it didn't define her. She had the power to change the course of her future. Kale placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her silent support. Alira looked up at him, feeling the surge of gratitude. "I can't do this alone," she whispered. The old man nodded slowly. "No one can do it alone. But together, with pure intent and strength of heart, you can overcome the darkness. And in doing so, you will restore your kingdom." Elira stood up, her heart racing with the newfound understanding of her destiny. She had spent so long running from her past, trying to escape the burden of the curse. But now, she realized that her past had given her everything she needed to move forward. It had shaped her, tested her, and now it was time to rise above it. "We're ready," Elira said, her voice steady. "I'm ready to face the challenge. I'm ready to restore my kingdom." The old man gave her a long, searching look before nodding. "Then the final step begins. But remember, the greatest strength lies not in what you have lost, but in what you have gained." As Elira and Cale prepared to leave the room, the old man's words echoed in her mind. The final truth had been revealed, and with it came a new sense of purpose. She was no longer a broken princess. She was a leader, someone with the power to shape her own destiny. And together with Cale by her side, Elira was ready to face whatever came next. The old man's words lingered in Elira's mind as she and Cale stepped out of the weathered building. The air outside had grown colder, the setting sun casting long shadows across the land. The final step was before her, accepting the challenge, breaking the cycle, and restoring her kingdom. But this time, she was not alone. Cale stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor as she prepared to face whatever came next. "We know what we have to do," Cale said, his voice calm and reassuring. Elira nodded, though her heart raced. "I have to return to my people, to show them I am not the lost princess they thought I was. I have to prove that I can lead, that I can heal what has been broken." Cale placed a hand on her shoulder. "And you will. You've already done more than most could. You've faced your past, accepted it, and now you're ready to rise above it. The kingdom will see that." They began their journey back to the kingdom, the path long and treacherous. The world around them was still harsh, with wild terrain and dangerous creatures lurking in the shadows. But Elira no longer feared what lay ahead. She had discovered the truth of her curse, and with that truth came the strength to face whatever challenges came her way. As they neared the border of her kingdom, Elira could feel the weight of her past bearing down on her once more. It had been so long since she had set foot here, so long since she had been abandoned, cast aside by those who once called her their princess. The memories were painful, but now they were also a reminder of how far she had come. She was not the same person who had been exiled. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to lead. When they reached the gates of the kingdom, Elira stopped, taking a deep breath. She could feel the eyes of the people on her, their gaze filled with suspicion and doubt. She wasn't the princess they remembered. She wasn't even the person she had once been. But that was what they needed to see, to witness her rise from the ashes of her past. Cale stood beside her, unwavering in his support. "They will follow you, Elira. You don't have to prove anything to me. But to them, you need to show your strength." Elira turned to him, a determined look in her eyes. "I will." With that, she stepped forward, walking into the heart of her kingdom. The streets were quiet, the air thick with anticipation. As she moved through the city, whispers followed her, people uncertain of what to think, uncertain of who she was now. But Elira did not falter. She kept her head high, her step steady. Finally, she reached the royal palace, the place where her journey had started and where it would now come full circle. The throne room was as cold and imposing as it had always been, but today it felt different. Today it was a symbol of what she could become, not what had been taken from her. The council of nobles and advisors were already gathered, their faces filled with disbelief as Elira entered. She could feel their eyes on her, each one filled with questions and judgment. But she was no longer afraid. "I have returned," Elira said, her voice clear and strong. "And I have learned that the curse placed on me was never meant to break me. It was meant to test me. to test my strength, my resolve, and my ability to lead. I have faced the darkness within myself and emerged stronger for it. The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared speak. Kale stood at her side, a silent but powerful reminder of her journey. "I am not the lost princess you thought I was," Alira continued, her voice unwavering. "I am the leader your kingdom needs. I will restore what was lost, and together we will rise." Her words echoed through the room, and slowly the nobles began to stir. One by one, they stood, their expressions changing from disbelief to respect. They saw the strength in her eyes, the conviction in her voice. Alira had proven herself, not just to them, but to herself. The curse had not been her end. It had been the beginning of her true journey. And as Alira stood before her people, she knew that the future was hers to shape. The past had shaped her, but it would not define her. She was no longer the broken princess. She was the ruler her kingdom had always needed. With Kale by her side, and the support of those who had once doubted her, Alira was ready to lead her people into a new era, one where strength, unity, and hope would triumph over darkness. The princess had risen.